You people should be grateful we even serve you in first class." The words hit harder than turbulence. They sliced through the quiet hum of the cabin at 35,000 feet, landing on a man in a crimson suit who didn't flinch. The other passengers froze, forks midair, eyes darting between disbelief and discomfort. The flight attendant stood over him, jaw tight, tray trembling slightly in her hand. She had no idea that the man she just humiliated would, in 5 minutes, bring her entire airline to its knees. Before we go further, take a breath. If you've ever been dismissed, judged, or talked down to because of how you look, stay right here. What happens next will remind you why silence can be the most powerful response of all. 30 seconds earlier, the cabin had been calm silverware clinking softly, light bouncing off glass and chrome. The smell of reheated chicken drifted through the air, the kind of scent no one questions at altitude. Then the attendant, Rebecca Hayes, 38, leaned forward to serve the man in seat 3D. Her smile was thin, polite, rehearsed. The kind you give someone you already decided to dislike. She placed a covered tray in front of him and said, too loudly, "Here you go, sir. Hope this is up to your standards." When he lifted the lid, the air shifted. The food was spoiled, gray edges, a sour smell, and a slick sheen that said it had been sitting too long. The passengers nearby wrinkled their noses. Rebecca didn't apologize. She folded her arms and said, "Maybe next time. Try economy. The meals are simpler there." He looked up at her, calm, collected, eyes dark and steady. "This is spoiled," he said evenly. "You might want to check the other trays." She smirked. "I know what's fresh, sir. Maybe your palate's just different." The man didn't reply. His name was Daniel Reed, 44, and silence was his weapon. He reached into his jacket pocket and tapped his phone once. No recording, no outrage, just a quiet signal sent through an encrypted app. Across the aisle, a teenage passenger whispered to his mother, "Did she just say that?" The mother hushed him, embarrassed, but didn't look away. Rebecca took his silence as defiance. She stepped closer, finger raised, her voice tightening. "You think being dressed nice makes you better than the rest of us? You people always push it?" Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone started recording. A pilot's shadow appeared at the cockpit door. Daniel's jaw set. He didn't need to stand up to feel tall. He spoke quietly, each word precise. 5 minutes from now," he said, "you will wish you tasted your own service before serving mine." Rebecca blinked, confused, but the tension was already spreading like smoke. Passengers whispered, phones lifted, and outside, somewhere in the network of the airline's servers, a silent alert began to move. The tension did not fade. It grew. It spread through the cabin like an electrical current no one could see but everyone could feel. Rebecca Hayes stood frozen beside the aisle cart, her face tight, her lips forming a hard line that tried to look composed but failed. The other passengers looked anywhere except at her or the man in red. Daniel Reed did not move. His hands rested on the armrests, calm, controlled, as if he had decided that stillness was his armor. From the galley behind her, another flight attendant stepped forward. His name was Josh Taylor, 29, confident, loud, and careless with power. He scanned the situation quickly, and his grin said everything. "What is the problem here?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Sir, did we not meet your expectations?" Rebecca's relief was immediate. "He is making a scene over a meal," she said. "Says it is spoiled." Josh glanced at the tray. He leaned in and sniffed dramatically. "Smells fine to me," he said. "Maybe it is just cultural differences in taste." That sentence landed like a slap. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "Did he just say that?" Her husband put a hand on her arm, signaling her to stay quiet. Daniel looked up. His gaze was direct, but not angry. "The food is spoiled," he said again, slowly, as if speaking to children. "I do not need your performance. I need accountability." Josh laughed, pretending to smooth his tie. "Big words for a passenger, man. Maybe you should relax before the captain gets involved." The air thickened. Rebecca folded her arms tighter. Somewhere near the front, a child began to cry, sensing the energy adults refused to name. Daniel did not respond. He reached for his tablet, typed a single line, and set it face down on the tray table. 3 rows away, a young woman named Erica, 25, a college student studying sociology, opened her phone camera and started recording. She whispered to herself, This is not right. Rebecca noticed and pointed. Put that away, she snapped. You cannot record on this flight. Erica kept her phone up. Then maybe stop giving people reasons to, she said quietly. The words hung there. Josh took a step forward, invading Daniel's space. Sir, I am giving you a chance to calm down, he said. You do not want to be escorted off when we land. Daniel's voice was soft, but it carried across the cabin. You have already decided who I am, and you are wrong. Sit down and stop digging. Josh frowned, ready to respond, but the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and clipped. Cabin crew, please prepare for light turbulence. The seatbelt sign blinked on. Rebecca grabbed the cart and shoved it toward the galley, harder than necessary. The cart's wheel clipped Daniel's shoe. She muttered, should have booked economy, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Erica's camera caught it all. 5 rows back, an older man in a gray suit lowered his newspaper. His name was Robert Miles, 71, retired judge. He had seen this kind of quiet cruelty his entire life. He pressed the call button above his seat. When Rebecca returned, he looked at her evenly. You served spoiled food, he said. Apologize and replace it. Rebecca's face flushed. Sir, you do not understand the situation. I understand perfectly, he replied. The situation is that you are humiliating a paying customer in front of witnesses. Correct it. Josh tried to interrupt, but Robert raised one finger, silencing him. Young man, I spent 40 years listening to tone, and I know the sound of bias when I hear it. You are 1 sentence away from an official complaint. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly. She forced a smile. Of course, Judge. I mean, sir, I will fix it. She turned to the galley, but Daniel's voice stopped her. Do not bother, he said quietly. The problem is not the food, it is the training. That line cut through the air like glass. Rebecca spun around. Excuse me? You heard me, Daniel replied, calm as ever. You have been trained to serve the image, not the person. To protect the brand, not the truth. That is why you think tone can replace integrity. Josh laughed again, nervous now. Who even talks like that? You think you are somebody? Daniel looked at him for a long moment, then said, I think you will find out soon. The words were not loud, but they hit harder than a shout. Rebecca's headset buzzed suddenly. The cockpit wanted an update. Her voice wavered as she answered. Minor situation, passenger complaint, under control, Hazer. But it was not under control. The atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted completely. Passengers whispered to each other, some disgusted, some uneasy. Erica's video was already uploading with the caption, First class, same old story. At the back, a young trainee attendant named Mia looked on, frozen between fear and conscience. She had seen the meal manifest. She knew exactly where that tray came from. It had been marked expired, hold for disposal. She opened her mouth to speak, but Rebecca's glare stopped her cold. Daniel noticed. His eyes met Mia's for a second. He gave a subtle nod, an unspoken message. Truth has its own time. The engines hummed louder. Outside, clouds folded over the wings like waves. Inside, silence spread until even the clinking glasses stopped. Then from the cockpit, the intercom chimed again. All crew, please report to the galley immediately. Rebecca straightened, confused. Josh followed, whispering, Why is he calling us? Daniel sat perfectly still, eyes fixed forward, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips, because 5 minutes had just begun. The aisle felt longer now, as if the plane itself sensed the shift in gravity that had nothing to do with altitude. Rebecca and Josh moved toward the galley, their shoes clicking in sync with the hum of the engines. Every head turned slightly as they passed. No one said a word, but the air was heavy with judgment. Even silence had taken sides. Daniel remained in his seat, hands folded loosely in his lap. The spoiled food still sat on the tray table, untouched, a quiet piece of evidence glowing under the overhead light. The faint odor of rot hung in the air, undeniable now. Across from him, the elderly judge sat upright, his expression carved from stone. Behind Daniel, the college student Erica kept her phone low but still rolling. Every breath, every glance, every tremor was being captured. In the galley, the captain was waiting. His name was Captain Warren Price, 53, sharp, composed, a man who prided himself on order. He stood with one hand braced on the counter, the other holding a tablet that displayed the passenger manifest. What is happening up there? he asked quietly, his voice steady but laced with irritation. Rebecca spoke first, her tone defensive. A passenger is being disruptive, Captain. He is accusing us of serving spoiled food and claiming we are discriminating against him. Josh nodded quickly. He is trying to start a scene. Some woman is filming. It is out of control. Captain Price's eyes narrowed. You are telling me a passenger is filming in first class during service, and you have not de-escalated it? Rebecca bristled. We tried, sir. He is the one refusing to cooperate. The captain tapped his tablet. Seat 3 Delta. Daniel Reed. Paid in full. Priority client. Frequent flyer. You are telling me this man is causing trouble? Josh hesitated. That is correct, Captain. He was rude, aggressive. Captain Price raised a hand. Stop. Was he aggressive, or was he firm? There is a difference, and one can cost us millions. Rebecca swallowed hard. He was firm. The captain sighed. Then you have already lost control of the narrative. Josh frowned. With respect, sir, this is being blown out of proportion. It is just one passenger. Captain Price turned the tablet toward them. The screen showed a live feed from the cabin camera. The feed displayed Daniel, still sitting calmly, the tray in front of him untouched. Next to him, the elderly judge was staring directly at the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. A red notification flashed in the corner of the screen. Passenger complaint in progress. Flagged for corporate review. Rebecca's stomach dropped. Corporate review? Already? The captain's voice dropped lower. Do either of you understand what that means? When a complaint triggers automatic review, it means the passenger holds elevated status. Legal, investor, or executive. That man is not just another traveler. Josh scoffed, forcing a laugh. You think he owns the airline or something? The captain did not laugh. I think he owns something that matters to us. Silence filled the galley. Outside the small curtain, passengers could hear faint murmurs, the scrape of utensils, the shifting of uneasy feet. In row 4, Erica leaned closer to the judge. Do you think they know who he is? She whispered. The judge shook his head. They do not, and they will regret finding out this way. Daniel looked out the window. The clouds below glowed pale gold under the afternoon sunday. His reflection stared back at him calm, composed, familiar. This was not the first time dignity had been tested in public. He remembered being 21, a newly hired analyst at an aviation catering firm, standing outside the employee entrance, while a manager told him deliveries were for authorized personnel only. He had shown his badge. They had laughed anyway. That laugh had lived with him for decades. He took a quiet breath and whispered to himself, some lessons have to repeat until people learn. In the galley, Captain Price broke the silence. You will both return to the cabin, apologize, replace the meal, and de-escalate immediately. That is an order. Rebecca's voice rose slightly. But Captain, he insulted me. No, he said sharply. He mirrored you. That is different. Do your job. They turned and walked back, faces tight with anger and embarrassment. As they stepped through the curtain, the cabin quieted again. The judge lowered his paper. Erica's camera caught the moment Rebecca forced a strained smile. Mr. Reed, she said through clenched teeth, we apologize for the misunderstanding. We would like to offer you another meal. Daniel turned his head slowly, his gaze steady. You cannot replace what you already poisoned, he said. But I accept your apology. Her face twitched. We will ensure this does not happen again. I know, Daniel replied. That is what audits are for. Josh's eyes flicked toward him. Audits? Daniel said nothing. He reached for his glass of water and took a slow sip. The gesture was deliberate, unhurried, powerful in its quietness. Behind them, Mia, the trainee, stood motionless. Her mind was racing. She knew about the expired tray, the label, the policy that said, dispose after 72 hours. She also knew that Daniel Reed was not just another passenger. Earlier that morning, she had overheard a maintenance supervisor mention his name in a briefing. Daniel Reed from Reed AeroCorp is inspecting our supply chain. Her pulse quickened. She looked at Rebecca, then at Daniel, then back to the galley. Erica's video pinged. Her phone vibrated. 50,000 views, she whispered. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm but strained. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we experience a brief delay in service. Rebecca turned pale. A delay in service? she whispered to Josh. What does that mean? It meant the review had already reached the ground. It meant corporate headquarters was watching live. And in seat 3 Delta, Daniel Reed placed his phone on the tray again. This time, the screen glowed faintly. One word pulsed across it, simple and final. Protocol initiated. The word protocol glowed softly on Daniel's phone screen like a quiet storm waiting to unfold. No one else could see it, but its presence was felt the kind of tension that makes the air seem heavier, the seconds slower. Daniel locked the screen, slid the phone beside the untouched tray, and leaned back in his seat. Across the aisle, the elderly judge kept his gaze forward, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, as if he already knew that justice had begun to move. A few seats back, Erica's phone continued to buzz. Notifications poured in. Likes, shares, comments. The caption, "He stayed calm while they showed their true faces," had struck a nerve. Rebecca tried to keep serving other passengers, but her movements had lost rhythm. The smiles came slower, the tone thinner. Josh whispered to her, "Something feels off. The captain has been silent for too long." She hissed back, "Do not panic. He is probably writing a report." But inside the cockpit, Captain Warren Price was not writing. He was reading. On his monitor, an internal message flashed. Alert. Compliance audit initiated by Reed AeroCorp. Record all crew communications. Do not interfere. He froze, staring at the name, Reed AeroCorp. He had seen that name in training modules, supplier invoices, even on the catering trucks that delivered their in-flight meals. The realization hit like cold air. He leaned back slowly and whispered, "That man. He owns the food we serve." Beside him, the co-pilot frowned. "Sir?" Captain Price's voice was low, cautious. "Seat 3 Delta, Daniel Reed. I think we made a mistake we cannot undo." Back in the cabin, Daniel reached for the call button. The soft chime echoed. Rebecca turned reluctantly. "Yes, Mr. Reed?" He pointed to the spoiled tray. "Please remove this. It is contaminating the air." Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the tray. The smell, stronger now, confirmed everything he had said earlier. She tried to keep her composure. "We will handle it, sir." Daniel looked at her, voice calm but cutting. "I know you will. You are about to handle much more." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Josh appeared beside her again, his grin forced. "Sir, we would like to make this right. Maybe a free flight voucher, a bottle of wine." Daniel interrupted softly. "Do you know where your food comes from, Mr. Taylor?" Josh frowned. "From the catering service." "And who owns that service?" Daniel asked. Josh hesitated, glancing at Rebecca. "I do not know." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is exactly the problem. You serve something every day without knowing whose hands built it, whose standards define it, whose signature signs the check that pays you. You think power wears a name tag. It does not." Rebecca's face drained of color. "Are you saying—" Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice still even. "I am saying that your mistake is not serving spoiled food. It is serving arrogance." The words landed like thunder muffled by velvet. No shouting, no anger, just truth delivered with surgical precision. From the rear of the cabin, Mia, the young trainee, took a step forward. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Mr. Reed," she said carefully, "I saw the catering manifest this morning. That tray should have been marked for disposal." Every passenger turned toward her. Rebecca's eyes widened. "Mia, stop talking." Mia shook her head. "It is true. The label was red. Someone removed it." "Oh." Daniel looked at her, the faintest smile in his eyes. "Thank you for your honesty." The judge spoke up, his voice resonant and controlled. "There it is," he said. "The truth, simple and undeniable." Rebecca stammered. "It was an oversight, just a mistake." "No," Daniel said gently. "A mistake is forgetting. This was deliberate." The captain's voice suddenly crackled through the intercom. "Cabin crew, return to your stations immediately." Rebecca exhaled in relief and hurried back to the galley. Josh followed, muttering, "He cannot prove anything." But when they entered the galley, the captain was already waiting. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "Sit down," he ordered. Rebecca frowned. "Sir, we were told to—" "Sit," he repeated. "Now." They obeyed, confused. The captain turned his tablet around. It displayed a live message from headquarters. "Audit team online. Compliance director observing." Josh's throat went dry. "What does that mean?" Captain Price looked at them both. It means you are being watched in real time by the people who pay for your uniforms. Rebecca tried to speak, but he cut her off. Do you understand who Daniel Reed is? She shook her head. A difficult passenger. The captain's tone was sharp. He is the founder and majority shareholder of Reed AeroCorp, the global catering and logistics company that provides every meal, napkin, and beverage served on this airline. Ugh. Josh's face went white. That is not possible. Captain Price glared at him. Possible or not, it is fact. He built the system that feeds this plane, and you insulted him with his own product. Rebecca slumped back, speechless. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Daniel sat still. He watched the sky through the window, the clouds drifting below like slow rivers of light. The calm in his posture made the surrounding chaos feel louder. Erica's phone buzzed again. Her post had reached 100,000 views. Comments filled the screen. He is handling it with grace. This is how you expose bias. The judge leaned slightly toward Daniel. I have seen many forms of justice, he said quietly, but rarely one this silent. Daniel gave a faint nod. Silence does not mean surrender. It means precision. At the back of the plane, Mia stood by the galley curtain, listening as Rebecca's voice cracked under the weight of realization. The captain's words carried clearly through the thin door. Prepare yourselves. Headquarters wants to speak to him directly when we land. Mia closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, Good, let them see. Outside, the sky darkened. The plane began to descend through layers of cloud that looked like smoke after a storm. Inside, no one spoke. They could feel the power shifting quietly, permanently. And in seat 3 Delta, Daniel Reed exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of patience. He looked down at his phone. The word protocol had disappeared, replaced by 2 new words flashing in calm blue light. The cabin descended into a silence so deep it seemed to have texture, a kind of stillness that pressed against the chest. The engines hummed steadily beneath the floor, but inside, every sound felt magnified. The rustle of paper, the click of a pen, the faint thump of turbulence brushing against metal. Passengers shifted in their seats, trying not to stare but failing. Everyone knew something had changed. They just did not understand how much. Daniel Reed remained motionless in seat 3 Delta, eyes steady, posture calm. His phone screen dimmed again, now blank, but the power of what it had triggered was already in motion. Across the aisle, the elderly judge sat with his hands folded, studying Daniel like a man reading the final page of a story he had waited his whole life to see written. A faint chime broke the quiet. Rebecca Hayes emerged from the galley, face pale, lips tight, her polished composure fractured. She tried to walk with authority, but her hands betrayed her, shaking as she approached Daniel's row. Mr. Reed, she began, voice tight. Our captain would like to apologize personally for the misunderstanding earlier. Daniel's eyes lifted slowly. Misunderstanding, he repeated, his tone even. Is that what we are calling it? Rebecca swallowed. There was no ill intent. These things happen. We want to make this right. The judge leaned slightly forward. Making it right would have begun with an apology, not a cover-up. Rebecca turned toward him, flustered. Sir, this is between the airline and the passenger. He raised an eyebrow. When discrimination happens in public, it belongs to everyone who heard it. Passengers murmured quietly. The weight of the moment was growing again. Daniel spoke softly but clearly. You cannot fix what you will not name. Rebecca froze. Excuse me? You called it service, Daniel said. But it was judgment. You called it policy, but it was bias. That is what you served today. She took a step back, her throat tight. I did not mean intent does not erase impact, Daniel said. A wave of agreement rippled through the passengers. Erica, still recording, whispered, That line right there, that is the one. At the front of the cabin, Captain Warren Price stepped through the curtain. His face was composed again, the voice of a man who had decided to regain control no matter the cost. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, we will be landing shortly. Please return to your seats and prepare for descent. Then he turned directly to Daniel. Mr. Reed, I would like a private word. Daniel nodded once. Then speak. The captain hesitated. In the galley, please. No, Daniel said evenly. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of the people who witnessed it. The captain's jaw tightened. Very well. He drew a slow breath. On behalf of Horizon Airlines, I extend an apology for the unprofessional behavior of my crew." Rebecca stared at him, shocked. "Captain," he silenced her with a glance. "You have done enough damage for one day." Daniel studied him for a moment, then said, "I appreciate the apology, Captain, but I am afraid this has already moved beyond words." The captain's expression faltered. "What do you mean?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Do you know what happens when a supplier audit collides with a discrimination complaint? It becomes a matter of corporate ethics and brand liability. Your airline will be answering for both by the time we land." Gasps spread through the cabin. Rebecca looked like she might faint. Josh, standing behind her, muttered under his breath, "Oh, no." The captain tried to recover. "Mr. Reed, surely we can handle this internally." "Oh." Daniel's tone did not rise, but his words cut cleanly. "You already handled it publicly." The judge nodded approvingly. Justice should never hide behind closed doors. The captain exhaled heavily, defeated. "What will happen now?" Daniel looked out the window at the thinning clouds. "The system will correct itself. That is what it was designed to do." Rebecca finally spoke again, her voice shaking. "I did not know who you were." Daniel turned his gaze back to her. "That is the point, Miss Hayes. You should not need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." Her lip trembled. "Please, Mr. Reed, He stopped her gently. "Save your apology for the report you will write tonight. The truth will need it." The plane tilted slightly as it began its slow descent. The skyline appeared in the distance, glittering through thin layers of cloud. Below, the airport spread like a web of light and movement, unaware that a storm of consequence was about to land with the plane. In the back, Mia, the young trainee, stood frozen by the service station. She was pale but resolute. She had sent her own message quietly, through the internal crew channel, to confirm that the expired tray had been served against procedure. It was a simple act, but it carried the weight of integrity. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, more subdued this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Please remain seated until we arrive at the gate." 15 minutes. Rebecca looked around at the faces staring at her, the passengers she had once assumed would back her, now silent, cold, distant. She turned away and hurried toward the galley, her eyes glassy with humiliation. Daniel watched her go. There was no anger in his expression, only a quiet understanding that she had just begun her own kind of descent. He lifted his phone once more. The screen lit up with a live connection request. "Compliance Division, Horizon Air Group." A woman's voice came through his earpiece, crisp and efficient. "Mr. Reed, we have received your trigger alert. Phase 2 complete. Shall we proceed with Phase 3 upon landing?" Daniel spoke softly, his tone steady. "Proceed, and make sure the captain receives the briefing before the cabin doors open." "Confirmed," she replied. He ended the call and looked out at the fading light, the golden horizon now breaking through the clouds. Around him, the passengers sat still, holding their breath as if waiting for the verdict of an invisible court. Daniel exhaled quietly, his reflection faint against the window. Sometimes justice does not need volume. Sometimes it only needs altitude. The wheels touched the runway with a soft, controlled thud, but the calm sound belied the storm that waited inside the fuselage. The engines roared briefly, then eased as the aircraft slowed down the long stretch of asphalt. Passengers straightened their backs, relieved to have landed, yet their eyes darted from Daniel Reed to the crew, sensing that the flight was not over in spirit. Captain Warren Price's voice came over the intercom, low and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate." His tone was steady, but his palms were slick with sweat. The words he read were routine, but the weight of what awaited him was not. Rebecca Hayes stood by the galley, trying to breathe through the knot in her throat. Her reflection in the metal coffee pot looked distorted, unfamiliar. She had worked for Horizon Airlines for 12 years without a single complaint. She had memorized every rule, every phrase of customer service training, and yet none of that mattered now. A single moment of arrogance had unraveled everything. Josh Taylor stood beside her, rubbing his temples. "We can still fix this," he whispered. "Once we are off the plane, it is out of his hands." Rebecca shook her head slowly. "You do not understand. It is never out of his hands." The seatbelt sign dinged, but no one moved. Even the smallest motion felt charged. The elderly judge glanced around the cabin, his tone calm but firm as he said, "This is one of those rare moments when silence teaches louder than argument." Erica lowered her phone. ending the recording. The view count had already passed 200,000. "The world is watching," she whispered. Outside, ground vehicles began to surround the aircraft. Catering trucks, baggage loaders, and a sleek black sedan waited near the private entry gate. None of that was unusual for a flight's arrival, until Rebecca noticed that one of the catering trucks bore a logo she had never seen before: Reed AeroCorp Compliance Division. Her pulse spiked. "Oh my God," she muttered. Josh followed her gaze. "That cannot be real. He called them that fast?" Mia, the young trainee, spoke quietly from behind them. "He did not call them. The system called itself. It is automatic when he triggers it." Rebecca turned, stunned. "How do you know that?" Mia swallowed. "Because Reed AeroCorp runs the same training program for logistics interns. They told us that the company has real-time audit protocols connected to all major airlines they serve." Rebecca's lips parted, but no sound came. The intercom chimed again. "Cabin crew, prepare doors for arrival." The plane slowed to a final stop. The chime sounded once more. The door clicked, and cool air rushed in. But before anyone could stand, the captain's voice filled the cabin again, tighter now, almost strained. "All passengers, please remain seated. We are awaiting clearance to disembark." Daniel Reed looked calm, almost serene. He adjusted his cufflinks, the gold catching the light from the window. The judge leaned slightly toward him. "I suspect this is the moment they realize how power truly works," he said. Daniel gave a faint nod. "It works quietly, until it does not." The cockpit door opened. Captain Price stepped out, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. He made his way down the aisle, each step echoing in the heavy air. When he reached Daniel's row, he stopped. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly, "Compliance has requested a meeting with you on the tarmac. They have also requested that the crew remain on board for questioning." Daniel looked up at him. "Of course." Rebecca stepped forward. "Captain, please." The captain turned sharply. "Not another word." His tone left no room for argument. Ground staff entered the cabin, two uniformed compliance officers wearing discreet badges with the Reed AeroCorp insignia. One of them, a woman with close-cropped hair and sharp, focused eyes, nodded respectfully toward Daniel. "Mr. Reed, good afternoon. We received your signal. Protocol Phase 3 is in effect." The passengers stared in stunned silence. No one spoke. The realization dawned in slow motion: this man was not just wealthy. He was infrastructure. The woman turned to the captain. "Captain Price, your flight manifest, crew communications, and internal logs have already been downloaded for review. Please remain seated with your team until the preliminary audit is complete." Rebecca's knees weakened. "This cannot be happening." Daniel stood, smoothing his jacket. "It is happening because it needed to." The compliance officer gestured toward the exit. "Mr. Reed, your transport is ready." As he stepped into the aisle, passengers instinctively leaned back, giving him space. Erica whispered to her camera. He never raised his voice. Not once. Daniel paused beside her seat. "You should keep that recording," he said gently. "People forget too easily what silence can expose." She nodded, speechless. At the galley, he stopped in front of Mia. Her hands trembled, but her eyes met his without fear. "You spoke up when you did not have to," he said. "That is integrity. If you ever want a place where that matters, my office is in Atlanta." Her eyes widened. "Thank you, sir." Rebecca watched helplessly as Daniel stepped toward the door. For a brief second, their eyes met. She wanted to apologize again, but words felt too small now. He gave her a look that was not cruel, but final. "Next time you serve someone," he said softly, "look at them as if your job depends on it, because it might." He stepped through the open door, the sunlight framing him in gold. Cameras flashed from outside. The black sedan door opened. Daniel Reed disappeared inside without a backward glance. The compliance officer turned back toward the crew. "No one leaves this plane until we finish." The captain sat heavily in his seat, rubbing his temples. "He said 5 minutes," he murmured. He was right. Rebecca looked out the window, where the Reed AeroCorp convoy was already moving away from the aircraft. The sun glared off the metal wings, blinding her for a moment. When her vision cleared, the reflection of her own face stared back, tired, pale, and stripped of certainty. In the cabin, the passengers began to whisper again, their voices low but electric. Some spoke with awe, others with discomfort. but all of them knew they had witnessed something that would not fade easily. And at 30,000 feet below Pride, the lesson hung in the air like the scent of spoiled food, impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. The air on the tarmac was sharp and bright, filled with the smell of jet fuel and sunlight bouncing off metal. From the cabin windows, passengers watched as Daniel Reed's black sedan pulled away in a smooth, silent motion. They saw him lift his phone once, the gesture calm and deliberate, before the tinted glass swallowed his reflection. To those still trapped inside the plane, it felt like the world outside had started moving again, while they remained frozen in the aftermath. Inside the aircraft, the compliance officers moved methodically. They were not loud, not confrontational, but their precision carried more power than shouting ever could. The lead officer, the woman with close-cropped hair, introduced herself quietly. "My name is Officer Elaine Porter, Senior Compliance Division, Reed AeroCorp. We are conducting an immediate ethics and safety audit per Directive 374. This process is now official." Rebecca Hayes blinked rapidly, her throat dry. "Audit? I thought this was just a complaint." Officer Porter turned her gaze toward her. "When the owner of the catering conglomerate you represent files a discrimination report, it ceases to be a complaint. It becomes a corporate matter of liability." Josh Taylor slumped against the bulkhead, his voice cracking. "Are we being suspended?" Porter's tone did not change. "You are being interviewed. What happens next depends on the truth." At the cockpit, Captain Warren Price sat with his headset removed, hands clasped tightly together. He had been through emergency landings, mechanical failures, and storms. But this silence unsettled him more than anything else. He looked toward Porter. "Officer, I will cooperate fully. My crew followed standard procedure as best they could." Porter met his eyes. Standard procedure does not include humiliation, nor does it include tampering with disposal labels. The captain's eyes flickered with shock. "Tampering? What are you talking about?" Mia, standing nearby, spoke softly but clearly. "The red label was removed from the tray. I saw it before service began." Rebecca spun toward her, voice trembling with outrage and fear. "You are lying." Mia did not flinch. "You know I am not." Officer Porter raised a hand. "Thank you, Miss Alvarez. Your statement has been noted." She turned to Rebecca. "We have photographic records from the storage logs. The tray in question was marked expired 72 hours ago. Someone overrode the system tag." Josh tried to speak, but the words came out uneven. We thought the alert was an error. It happens sometimes when the scanner misreads a label." Porter nodded once. "Perhaps, but you served it to the one man in the world who wrote that labeling system." The realization hit like a wave. Even the hum of the engines outside seemed to fade. Rebecca pressed her hand to her forehead. "I did not know, I swear I did not know who he was." Porter studied her quietly. "And if he had not been who he was, would you have treated him differently?" Rebecca looked down. The answer did not need to be spoken. Passengers began to move uneasily in their seats. They had front-row seats to a morality play, and no one dared to interrupt. Erica, the college student, whispered to the judge. "Do you think he planned all of this?" The judge replied without looking up. "No, he did not plan it. He allowed it." Outside, the black sedan came to a stop near the airport's executive terminal. Daniel Reed stepped out, the breeze lifting the edge of his jacket. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had already measured every consequence. Inside the terminal, a small group waited corporate representatives from Horizon Airlines and Reed AeroCorp's legal division. A woman in a tailored Navy suit approached him immediately. "Mr. Reed, the preliminary findings have been transmitted. The footage from the passenger cabin is trending globally. We are preparing a statement." Daniel nodded. "No statement. Not yet." She hesitated. "Sir, the public expects a response." "The public expects accountability," Daniel said. "Words can wait. Action cannot." Back on the aircraft, Officer Porter addressed the captain and his crew once more. "Headquarters has requested that the senior crew remain for further questioning. Your replacements will handle the next flight segment." Rebecca's composure broke. "Please, officer, this will ruin my career." Porter's expression softened slightly, but not enough to comfort. "Careers recover. Character does not, unless you rebuild it." The captain closed his eyes. "What happens now?" "The report goes to both corporations," Porter said. Mr. Reed will review the findings personally. Mia stepped forward timidly. Officer, may I say something? Porter nodded. Go ahead. Mia's voice shook, but her words were clear. He did not want revenge. You could see it. He just wanted them to understand what it feels like to be invisible. For the first time since landing, Rebecca looked up at Mia. The younger woman's calm gaze made her feel smaller than any reprimand ever could. Outside, Daniel stood by the sedan. Looking back toward the aircraft that still gleamed under the Sunday, his assistant approached with a folder. The audit reports will be complete within the hour. Would you like to proceed with the termination orders? Daniel looked toward the sky, where another plane crossed above them, leaving a thin white trail that vanished into blue. No, he said after a moment. Not yet. Let them sit in what they built. His assistant nodded quietly. And the video, sir? Daniel's voice remained calm. It will speak for itself. Back in the cabin, Officer Porter finished collecting witness statements. She looked at the passengers and said, This flight is officially under review. You are free to disembark. One by one, passengers rose, their movements slow, almost reverent. As they passed Rebecca and Josh, they avoided eye contact. The judge paused near Rebecca's seat. You can only hide behind procedure for so long, he said gently. Eventually, people see who you are when no rulebook is watching. Rebecca nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. I see it now. Oh. When the last passenger left, the plane felt hollow, a shell of metal holding the echoes of what had just happened. The compliance team packed their equipment. The captain remained seated in the cockpit, staring out at the runway. Far beyond the airport fences, Daniel's car merged onto the highway. He watched the airport shrink in the distance through the rear window, his expression unreadable. Justice, he thought, was not a storm. It was pressure, and today, the air itself had learned how to breathe differently. The black sedan moved steadily through the service road of Los Angeles International Airport, its tires whispering against the concrete. The sun had started to lower, painting the metal of hangars and planes in amber and gold. Inside the car, Daniel Reed sat silent, the light flickering across his face as they passed each row of gates. His assistant, Carla Jensen, sat beside him with a digital tablet on her lap. Notifications blinked across the screen, news alerts, internal reports, and one message flashing red at the top. Viral footage, global trend #3, Flight 492 incident. Carla glanced at Daniel. Sir, it has spread faster than expected, over 3 million views in under an hour. Daniel looked out the window. People love outrage more than change, but outrage has its uses. Carla hesitated. The airline has already released a short statement. They claim a misunderstanding and promise full cooperation. Daniel gave a quiet nod. They are managing optics, not ethics. Let them try. The car turned onto a private lane leading toward the Reed AeroCorp operations hangar, a facility that housed the company's catering, logistics, and compliance units for multiple airlines. Security guards straightened at the sight of the car. Inside the hangar, workers paused briefly, recognizing the founder they had only seen in internal training videos. Carla opened her tablet again. The compliance division reports that Captain Price remained calm during questioning. Hayes and Taylor both admitted to removing the disposal label but blamed a software glitch. Daniel's expression did not change. When people are caught, they always blame the system, never themselves. Carla continued. The young trainee, Mia Alvarez, provided full testimony. She identified the chain of command and attached photographic proof from her phone. And that drew a faint trace of approval to Daniel's features. Good. Make sure she receives protection from retaliation and an internal commendation. Quietly, but officially. Yes, sir, Carla said, typing the note. Daniel's eyes drifted to the window again. The plane that had carried him was still visible in the distance, now surrounded by maintenance trucks. From afar, it looked small, fragile like an apology that had arrived too late. Schedule a board call in 2 hours, Daniel said. I want Horizon Air's executives present. No publicists, no legal buffers, just accountability. Carla looked uncertain. Sir, if you move this to the board level, it will trigger contractual penalties and likely cost them their supply exclusivity. That could destabilize several airline partnerships. Daniel turned to her. Then perhaps it is time those partnerships learned what happens when dignity becomes optional. She nodded, not arguing further. As the car slowed in front of the hangar entrance, Daniel's phone vibrated softly. The caller ID read, Warren Price. He stared at the name for a long moment before answering. Captain. The voice on the other end was low, weary. Mr. Reed, I wanted to apologize personally. I did not see what was happening soon enough. I should have intervened earlier. Daniel's voice remained calm. You saw it. You just did not believe it mattered until it reached you. There was silence. Then the captain said, You are right. Daniel continued, his tone neither cruel nor forgiving. Captain, I do not destroy people. I expose systems. Whether they learn or not is their choice. I understand, the captain replied. For what it is worth, I am grateful you handled this with restraint. Daniel's lips curved faintly. Restraint is not silence, it is control. He ended the call. Inside the hangar, Daniel stepped out of the car. The air smelled of oil, steel, and motion, familiar scents that carried the history of everything he had built. A team of managers waited near the entrance. One of them, a tall woman in a gray suit, stepped forward. Mr. Reed, we have secured all catering data for the flight. Would you like a full review? Yes, Daniel said. In the boardroom. They walked through a corridor lined with photographs of aircraft and crews, decades of aviation history frozen in silver frames. Daniel paused briefly at one image showing a young man in an apron, smiling beside a catering truck. It was him, 23 years old, when Reed AeroCorp was just an idea and not yet a network that fed the skies. He stared at it for a moment, then said quietly, We built this to serve, not to discriminate. In the boardroom, screens illuminated with data feeds, shipment logs, compliance reports, customer complaints. On the largest screen, paused mid-frame, was the video of Rebecca Hayes standing over Daniel's tray. Her expression, captured in perfect clarity, had become the face of corporate arrogance. Carla began the presentation. This footage has been verified and mirrored on every major social platform. We have confirmation that Horizon Air's management tried to contact media outlets to contain the narrative, but it is already too late. Daniel watched the frozen image silently, then said, Do not delete it. Archive it as evidence of how dignity looks when ignored. Carla nodded. He moved closer to the screen, eyes narrowing slightly. Send the audit summary to every senior supplier and executive we partner with. Add one note at the top. Every system is judged by how it treats the people who cannot fight back. Carla typed quickly. Understood, sir. He walked to the window overlooking the runway. Planes lifted into the orange horizon, one after another, like endless repetitions of human ambition. Behind him, the screens flickered with headlines, each one a mirror of what he had endured hours earlier. Outside the glass, the aircraft from Flight 492 had begun its tow to a distant maintenance bay. Rebecca Hayes and Josh Taylor were escorted down the stairs under the supervision of compliance staff. Reporters waited beyond the restricted fence, their cameras already aimed. Carla approached quietly. Do you want to make a public statement now? Daniel did not turn around. No. Let the world speak first. It will tell us who it really is. He looked at the departing plane one last time, its tail shrinking into the light. Carla, he said softly, there is a phrase I learned a long time ago from my grandmother. She told me that every meal carries meaning because what you serve defines who you are. Carla listened in silence. He turned to her, his voice low but deliberate. Today they served humiliation. Tomorrow they will learn the taste of accountability. The hangar filled with the faint hum of distant engines. Somewhere beyond the noise, justice was no longer invisible. It had taken shape, found wings, and begun to circle back home. Night fell across Los Angeles International Airport, turning the runways into rivers of moving light. Inside the Reed AeroCorp headquarters building, glass reflected the city skyline like a mirror made of quiet power. Daniel Reed stood in his office on the top floor. The lights dimmed, the view stretching endlessly beneath him. Down below, planes rose and fell, each one carrying lives and stories he would never know. But tonight, all eyes were still on one flight, one moment, one lesson. On the large screen mounted on the wall, news anchors spoke over a loop of the viral video. The caption read, Airline faces backlash after serving spoiled meal to black executive. Another headline scrolled beneath it. Reed AeroCorp confirms. Founder was passenger involved in incident. Carla entered the room quietly, a stack of printed reports in her arms. Sir, The media requests have not stopped. Every major network wants a statement. Horizon Air's stock dropped 6% in after-hours trading. Daniel turned slowly from the window. That is not what concerns me. What about the passengers? She nodded, scrolling through her tablet. Most have confirmed their witness statements. The video from the student Erica has been authenticated. She has been approached by multiple outlets for interviews. Contact her, Daniel said. Offer to cover her education in full. No publicity attached. She saw what needed to be seen. Carla blinked. That is generous, sir. It is not generosity, Daniel replied. It is investment. Integrity must be encouraged, the same way corruption is punished. He walked toward the table, where a red folder waited. Across the cover, in bold letters, was written Horizon Air Contract, Exclusive Catering Agreement. He opened it, scanning the terms that had once made the partnership mutually beneficial. His fingers rested on a clause marked Ethical Compliance Assurance. They signed this, he said quietly. They promised that every person in their system would uphold it. Ubre. Carla looked uneasy. If you terminate this agreement, Horizon Air could lose its catering supply overnight. It could cause massive disruption. Daniel's gaze remained steady. Then perhaps disruption is overdue. He closed the folder and gestured toward the large conference screen. Carla tapped a button, and within seconds, faces appeared: executives from Horizon Air, corporate counsel, and representatives from Reed Aerocorp's board. The meeting began with polite introductions, but the tension was unmistakable. Mr. Reed, said a man on the Horizon side, his tone controlled but defensive. We want to extend our deepest apologies for the behavior of our staff. What happened does not represent our company's values. Daniel regarded him silently for a moment before speaking. Values are not what you print in brochures. They are what you allow when no one is watching. The man's expression tightened. We have already suspended the employees involved and initiated our own internal review. That is reaction, Daniel said, not responsibility. A woman from Horizon's legal team interjected. Mr. Reed, while we understand your frustration, this situation has already caused significant media distortion. We hope to resolve this matter privately and avoid further reputational harm to both parties. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You are worried about reputation. I am worried about repetition, because this is not the first time, is it? The woman hesitated. I am not aware of previous incidents of this nature. Carla tapped her screen, and another image appeared. Archived reports, small but documented cases of passenger complaints citing rude service, unexplained delays, and profiling behavior. None had made the news before. Daniel's voice dropped lower, precise and deliberate. My company feeds millions of people through your planes every year. We trust your staff to serve what we provide, not to poison it with prejudice, and yet, that is exactly what they did. The executives on screen remained silent. The tension grew heavier with each word. Finally, Daniel continued, you have 24 hours to implement an external ethics review across all crew training programs. I want transparency reports released to the public. If you fail to comply, Reed Aerocorp will terminate all existing contracts with Horizon Air effective immediately. One of the Horizon board members leaned forward, his voice rising slightly. That is impossible. You cannot dictate our operations. Daniel's tone remained calm. Then you can explain to your shareholders why their aircrafts will fly empty-handed. My logistics control 80% of your food distribution and 90% of your premium cabin services. Do not mistake patience for weakness. There was silence again. The only sound was the faint buzz of the city through the window. Finally, the Horizon CEO, an older woman with a tired but composed face, spoke. Mr. Reed, you are right. This was more than a mistake. It was moral negligence. We accept your terms. Daniel nodded once. Then fix it, and make sure your passengers never have to teach you decency again. The call ended. The screens went dark. Carla exhaled slowly. You just shifted an entire industry in a single conversation. Daniel walked back to the window. No. I reminded them that change does not ask for permission. He stood there for a long time, watching the planes rise into the night sky. The lights of Los Angeles shimmered below like a living organism, flawed, restless, human. Behind him, Carla gathered her things. Before leaving, she asked, Sir, what should I tell the media if they ask why you are not giving interviews? Daniel turned slightly. Tell them I am not here to perform righteousness. I am here to enforce it. When she left, the office returned to silence. The hum of the city outside sounded like distant applause mixed with wind. Daniel sat at his desk, opening a small wooden box. Inside lay an old silver spoon slightly tarnished, engraved with the initials of his grandmother. He ran a thumb over it, remembering the woman who had taught him that respect and service were not jobs, they were choices. He whispered to the empty room, "We do not serve food. We serve dignity." The lights dimmed further, and beyond the glass, a plane lifted into the darkness, its trail fading like the last echo of injustice finally losing altitude. The next morning arrived with the kind of silence that follows a storm, clear skies, bright sun, but a lingering weight in the air that refused to leave. The city was awake, but the conversation everywhere was the same. News anchors debated, analysts speculated, and social media platforms overflowed with a single phrase, the Flight 492 lesson. Across television screens, the viral video replayed again and again. The grainy image of a flight attendant serving a spoiled meal had become a symbol larger than the event itself. It was no longer about food. It was about dignity, about who gets to be believed, and about how easily prejudice hides behind professionalism. At Reed AeroCorp headquarters, reporters had gathered outside the main gate. Cameras flashed as employees arrived, their badges glinting under the morning sunday. The company had become the epicenter of a cultural reckoning, and yet inside its glass walls, calm ruled. The walls did not echo with panic. They resonated with purpose. Daniel Reed walked through the lobby, every step measured and quiet. He wore a gray suit this time, subtle, deliberate, without the flash of the crimson one from the flight. The receptionist nodded respectfully, and he returned the gesture with a small smile. He had slept only 3 hours, but exhaustion could not touch conviction. Carla Jensen met him outside the executive boardroom, tablet in hand. "Sir, the ethics review from Horizon Air just came in. They have agreed to your conditions and started retraining programs across all departments. The video has been incorporated into their new internal curriculum." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Good. Let the mirror become their teacher." Carla nodded. "Also, the young woman Erica has accepted your scholarship offer. She asked me to tell you something." "What is it?" She said, "Thank you for proving that calm is not weakness." Daniel smiled faintly, almost sadly. "She learned something that took me half a lifetime to understand." They entered the boardroom. The walls were lined with screens displaying data, media headlines, and the latest compliance reports. At the far end of the table, a group of department heads waited. The tension in their posture made it clear that this meeting was not routine. Daniel took his seat at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Let us begin." The director of communications spoke first. "Sir, public sentiment is overwhelmingly in your favor. You are being called a symbol of quiet resistance. People are demanding you make a public appearance." Daniel shook his head. "Symbols fade when people stop talking about them. Systems last when people start changing them. We are not here to trend. We are here to transform." The director hesitated. Understood. But the media will not stop asking for a statement. If we do not guide the narrative, others will. Daniel looked around the table. "Then we guide it through action, not speeches. Tell them we are expanding our equity and training initiative. Every contract partner, every airline, every logistics firm will undergo mandatory audits twice a year. Silent reform creates louder impact than press conferences." The head of operations, a tall man with silver hair, leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, that will cost millions." Daniel met his gaze. "So did ignorance, and ignorance has cost us more than money." There was no response. The room settled into a thoughtful quiet. After a moment, Daniel continued. "I want the focus shifted from punishment to progress. Rebecca Hayes and Josh Taylor will face consequences, but they will also be offered a choice rehabilitation training through our internal program. Let them confront what they created. If they learn from it, they can re-enter the system. If not, they stay outside it." Carla glanced up from her tablet. "That is mercy most would not extend." Daniel's voice softened. "Mercy without accountability is just permission, but accountability without mercy is cruelty. We will hold the line between them." He stood and walked toward the wide glass window. From this height, the airport looked almost peaceful. Planes glided across the sky like moving reflections of determination. He spoke without turning around. "I have been in rooms where I was the only black man present. I have been dismissed as a token, doubted as an outsider, and underestimated as an equal. But I learned something every time. Power is not what you hold in your hands, it is what you refuse to let go of inside your mind. The words carried through the room like slow thunder. Even the air seemed to pause. Then, breaking the silence, Carla said softly, "Sir, Horizon Air's chief executive officer has requested to meet you in person. She says she wants to apologize directly." Daniel turned, eyes calm. "Arrange it." "Yes, sir." She asked if the meeting could take place on the tarmac where the flight landed. Daniel considered it. "Appropriate. Let her stand where it began." Carla nodded and stepped out to make the arrangements. Daniel remained by the window, his reflection merging with the view outside. The city glowed beneath him, alive and imperfect. He thought of his grandmother's kitchen, of her voice saying, "Serve with heart, not hierarchy." He thought of the moment Rebecca had stood over him with that false smile, and how close arrogance always sits beside ignorance. His phone vibrated. A new message appeared on the screen, an internal memo from the compliance division. Phase 4 initiated. Public impact assessment in progress. Daniel read it once and placed the phone on the table. Outside, the morning sun reflected off a departing aircraft. For a brief moment, its light filled the room. Daniel closed his eyes and let it wash over him. He whispered quietly to himself, "They tried to reduce me to a passenger, but I was always the flight plan." He opened his eyes again, calm and certain. The day ahead would not be about revenge. It would be about redesign of systems, of standards, of what justice could look like when it no longer shouted but simply existed. And somewhere above the clouds, the echoes of Flight 492 continued to travel, carried not by noise, but by change. The tarmac was quiet again, just as it had been before the chaos. The same stretch of concrete where humiliation had unfolded now glowed in the afternoon light. The horizon shimmered under a calm sky, but the stillness carried weight like the pause before a verdict. Two black sedans waited near the edge of the runway, engines off, doors open. Daniel Reed stepped out of the first car, his posture composed, his face unreadable. The breeze caught his tie and lifted it slightly, the only movement against the stillness. Carla Jensen followed a few steps behind, holding a folder pressed to her chest. In front of them, a convoy of Horizon Air vehicles was parked in a neat line. From the center car emerged the Horizon Chief Executive Officer, Eleanor Finch, a woman in her early 60s, with sharp features softened only by the humility in her eyes. She walked slowly toward Daniel, heels clicking on the pavement. "Mr. Reed," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Daniel nodded. It seemed fitting to return to the scene of the lesson. Her eyes flickered. That is exactly what it was, a lesson we should have learned long ago. Carla stepped aside, giving them space. Cameras from the compliance division recorded from a discreet distance, not for broadcast, but for accountability. No one was here for a performance. Eleanor took a slow breath. "I watched the footage more times than I want to admit. Every time, it felt worse. There is no excuse for what happened on that flight." Daniel looked at her evenly. "Excuses are currency for people who never intend to pay their debt. What matters is how you spend the truth once you finally face it." She nodded. "I know. We failed. Not just as an airline, but as a culture. I came here to tell you that I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for direction." Daniel studied her for a moment. Direction begins with acknowledgement. It ends with action. Between the two is accountability. That is where most companies lose their balance. "How?" Eleanor exhaled slowly. "Then guide me through it." Daniel took a step closer, his voice steady. "You are not here to please me, Miss Finch. You are here to rebuild trust. Start with your people. Train them not in hospitality, but in humanity. Teach them that service is not a favor, it is a reflection." She lowered her gaze, nodding. "We have already begun. Every employee, from pilots to executives, will undergo ethical retraining. I will attend the sessions myself." "Good," Daniel said. "But remember, this training fixes ignorance, not arrogance. Arrogance requires consequence." Eleanor looked up again, her tone firm despite the shame. "We have terminated both attendants' employment, but we are also offering them counseling and education through our diversity program. I believe in redemption, even after failure." Daniel paused. "So do I. But redemption is not the same as avoidance." For a long moment, the two stood in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken truth. Nearby, the faint hum of another aircraft's engine broke the tension. Carla approached quietly. "Sir, The press is waiting by the terminal gate. They have been instructed to remain silent until this meeting concludes. Daniel glanced at her, then back at Eleanor. Do you plan to speak publicly today? Eleanor hesitated. Yes, I need to face what happened. Transparency is the least we can offer. Then speak with clarity, Daniel said. Not with damage control. The world does not need your sorrow, it needs your sincerity. She nodded once. Understood. Daniel's expression softened, though his tone stayed measured. Eleanor, I do not enjoy destroying reputations. I would rather build standards. That is why I am giving Horizon Air one more chance. But if this ever repeats, even once, I will not call. I will close every contract before your next flight leaves the ground. The warning carried no anger, only certainty. It was not a threat. It was a fact. Eleanor's voice was quiet. You have my word, and for what it is worth, you have my respect. Daniel turned slightly toward the sky. Respect is not owed. It is earned every day, one interaction at a time. At that moment, a new sound filled the air, the rhythmic clapping of footsteps on the pavement. Mia Alvarez, the trainee who had spoken the truth, was approaching with an envelope in her hand. She looked nervous but determined. Mr. Reed, she said, offering the envelope. This is for you. It is a copy of my written statement and the internal memo I sent before the audit. I thought you should have it. Daniel accepted it, scanning the top page briefly. You stood for honesty when it was inconvenient. That makes you rare. She smiled faintly. My mother always said, courage is what you do when your paycheck tells you not to. Daniel let out a quiet breath that could almost have been a laugh. She raised you well. Eleanor turned to Mia. You have a future here if you want it, she said sincerely. We could use people who know when to speak up. Mia looked between them both. Thank you, but I think I already know where I belong. Daniel extended his hand. We will talk soon. She shook it firmly, then walked back toward the terminal. The sun had shifted lower now, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Daniel glanced at Eleanor one last time. Remember this day, not for what went wrong, but for what it forced you to see. She nodded silently. Carla opened the car door. Sir, we are ready to depart. Daniel turned to her. Not yet. He looked back toward the aircraft hangars, his eyes narrowing with quiet thought. History does not change because people apologize. It changes because they finally stop defending what was broken. Eleanor watched him for a moment longer, then said softly, I hope this moment changes more than our company. I hope it changes us. Daniel gave a single nod. That is the point. He stepped into the car, the door closing with a muted thud. As the engine started, the car began to move, leaving the tarmac behind. Through the window, Daniel watched the world recede, the place of humiliation turned into a ground of awakening. For the first time in 24 hours, he allowed himself to breathe without restraint. The storm had ended, but something larger had begun. Justice, he thought, is not a finish line. It is a direction, and as long as people are willing to walk toward it, even slowly, the world can still learn how to rise. The black sedan glided through downtown Los Angeles as the city pulsed with its usual rhythm horns, voices, distant sirens, and the low hum of ambition that never slept. Yet, inside the car, the world was hushed. Daniel Reed sat in the back seat, phone in hand, reading the latest internal briefing. The screen's glow lit his face, cold and calm. Carla Jensen sat beside him, reviewing schedules on her tablet. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind built from mutual understanding rather than words. The media coverage has shifted, Carla said finally, breaking the quiet. They are calling you the silent catalyst. The narrative has moved from outrage to reform. People are debating corporate ethics now instead of race alone. Daniel looked out the window at the lights passing in streaks. That was always the point. Outrage fages. Structure remains. Carla scrolled further. There is more. The pilot, Captain Warren Price, submitted his resignation this morning. He wrote that he failed to intervene when dignity was being tested. Daniel did not look surprised. He is not wrong, but I will not accept his resignation. Carla looked up. You will not? No, Daniel said softly. He took responsibility. That is the beginning of leadership. Fire the arrogant. Keep the humble. She nodded and made a note. Understood. They crossed the bridge overlooking the freeway, headlights flickering like a stream of restless fire. Carla continued. The two attendants, Rebecca Hayes and Josh Taylor have both requested mediation through Horizon Air's ethics department. They want to participate in your retraining initiative. Daniel turned his gaze from the window. Do you think they deserve that chance? Carla hesitated. I think they need it. Whether they deserve it will depend on how they show up. Ho. He gave a faint nod. Then give it to them. But make sure they understand that this is not mercy. It is their one opportunity to rebuild what they broke. The car turned onto a quiet street, approaching Reed AeroCorp's downtown innovation hub, a glass structure that looked more like an art museum than an office. It was where Daniel had created his leadership renewal program, an initiative that brought executives, workers, and students together to confront unconscious bias through direct experience. Tonight, the first session of the new series was about to begin. When the car stopped, Daniel stepped out and looked up at the building. Its facade was alive with soft white light, reflecting off the mirrored windows. People were already arriving, employees, journalists, and young interns eager to witness the event. Daniel adjusted his tie, exhaled slowly, and entered. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and coffee. The lobby walls displayed quotes from leaders and thinkers, each engraved in silver lettering. One stood out above the rest. Power does not corrupt character, it reveals it. The audience gathered in a circular auditorium where every seat faced inward. There was no stage, no podium, only an open space meant for conversation. Daniel took his place at the center. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly, deep and unhurried. Good evening, he began. If you are here expecting a speech, you will be disappointed. Tonight is not about my voice, it is about yours. The room was silent. He continued. Every company believes it is fair. Every manager believes they are objective. Yet bias does not live in our policies, it lives in our instincts. It shows itself when we are tired, when we are proud, when we believe we are right. That is where it hides, and that is where we must look. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. A hand rose from the second row. It was Mia Alvarez, the young trainee. Sir, how do you keep calm when people try to humiliate you publicly? Daniel looked at her with quiet warmth. Because I remember that humiliation is a mirror, not a wound. It shows more about the one holding it than the one reflected in it. The audience murmured softly in agreement. Another hand rose, an older man in a corporate uniform. Mr. Reed, what about forgiveness? Do we forgive people like the ones on that flight? Daniel nodded slowly. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without carrying the poison forward. You can forgive without excusing. You can move on without erasing. Oh, why? He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person who dared to hold his gaze. I have seen power used to silence, to dominate, to control. But true power is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. It simply continues. A hush fell again. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the heartbeat of reflection moving through the crowd. After a long moment, Daniel spoke once more. When I was a boy, my grandmother told me something that I never forgot. She said, when people feed you hatred, do not eat it. Feed them patience instead. That patience saved me on that plane. But patience without action is complacency. That is why we are here tonight, to turn patience into policy, to turn silence into structure. He gestured toward the large screen behind him. It illuminated with live footage of airline staff beginning their new empathy training sessions, small groups of people discussing real stories, sharing discomfort, confronting bias. Daniel's voice softened but grew stronger in its calmness. If one flight can remind an industry what humanity looks like, then perhaps one voice can remind the world what decency feels like. As he finished, the audience stood in quiet applause, not the kind of applause that celebrates a performance, but the kind that honors a truth. Carla walked up beside him as the crowd began to disperse. You did not lecture them, she said. You let them see themselves. Daniel gave a small smile. People learn faster when they witness, not when they are warned. They walked together down the hall toward the exit. The glass doors opened to the night air, cool and wide. Above, the moon hung bright over the city, steady and full. Carla looked up at it. Sir, do you ever think about what would have happened if you had reacted differently on that plane? Daniel's eyes stayed on the horizon. Yes, he said quietly. It would have been another angry moment lost in the noise. Instead, it became a still moment that made the noise listen. They reached the car. Before getting in, Daniel looked back at the building. its light glowing softly against the darkness. "Carla," he said, "write this down for tomorrow's briefing. We are not just feeding airlines, we are feeding awareness. That will be our legacy." She nodded, typing quickly as they entered the car. As they drove away, Daniel glanced once more at the reflection of the moon on the windshield. It looked almost like a spotlight, and for the first time in days, he smiled, a small, real smile that reached his eyes. Justice had taken flight, and this time, it was never coming back down. The following morning, Los Angeles woke beneath a sky washed clean by dawn. The news cycle had shifted from shock to reflection. Commentators on every major network replayed the same sentence spoken by Daniel Reed the night before. "Humiliation is a mirror, not a wound." It had become the line everyone quoted, dissected, and debated. Some called it poetic, others called it revolutionary, but everyone agreed it was impossible to forget. Inside Reed AeroCorp's headquarters, the mood was neither triumphant nor tense. It was focused. Teams worked with unusual quiet, as if the entire building understood that something more than corporate duty was unfolding. For Daniel, this was no longer about a single airline. It was about a system of behavior he intended to rewrite. He sat in his office surrounded by morning light. His jacket hung on the back of his chair, and a fresh cup of coffee rested untouched beside a stack of briefing folders. Carla Jensen entered, tablet in hand. "Sir," she said, "the response to your renewal initiative has been overwhelming. 5 other airlines have already requested partnerships to join the program." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Then we are no longer correcting an incident. We are setting a standard." Carla nodded. "Yes, sir. And there is something else. The 2 attendants, Rebecca Hayes and Josh Taylor, have completed their preliminary mediation interviews. They want to meet you." Daniel looked at her calmly. "Here? They requested a video call," she said. "They said they do not expect forgiveness. They just want to face the person they failed." Daniel turned toward the window. The sun caught the edge of the skyline, painting the buildings gold. "Arrange it," he said. "Let them speak." Minutes later, the large conference screen came to life. 2 faces appeared, both pale, both strained. Rebecca's eyes were red, and her voice trembled when she spoke. "Mr. Reed," she began, "thank you for agreeing to this. I know I do not deserve your time." Daniel folded his hands. "Go on." "Ugh. I have spent the last few days watching the footage, listening to myself, and I can barely recognize the person I see. I thought I was doing my job, enforcing policy. But what I was really doing was defending my pride. I was wrong, completely wrong." Daniel listened without interrupting. Her words came haltingly, like a confession unraveling one sentence at a time. Josh Taylor spoke next, his tone heavier. "Sir, I watched it too. I saw my face, my smirk, my arrogance. I did not realize how much contempt I carried in my voice. I thought I was being professional. Now I see I was being cruel." Daniel's expression did not change, but his silence drew them forward. Rebecca continued. "We are both attending the training program you created. It is hard, humiliating even, but it should be. I wanted to thank you for not destroying our lives completely when you could have." Daniel spoke at last, his voice measured and steady. "You destroyed nothing that could not be rebuilt. But understand this. Humility is not a sentence. It is a choice. If you truly mean what you say, prove it by how you serve the next person who looks like me or who looks like no one you have ever understood." They both nodded, tears welling in Rebecca's eyes. "We will, sir. I promise." Daniel ended the call without further words. Promises were only as real as the actions that followed them. Carla exhaled quietly. "That was grace, sir." "Ugh." He shook his head. "That was clarity. Grace will come later if they earn it." A soft knock interrupted them. Mia Alvarez stepped into the office, holding a thin envelope. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Daniel smiled slightly. "Mia, you should be resting. I hear you have become somewhat of a folk hero among the crew." She blushed, shaking her head. "I am just trying to do my job right." "What is that?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the envelope. "A letter," she said. "From the employees who finished the first phase of the empathy training. They wanted you to see it." He took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet signed by dozens of names. The message was handwritten in blue ink. It read, "We see now, not just what we did wrong, but what we never saw at all. Thank you for showing us that silence can teach." Daniel read it twice before setting it down. His voice softened. "They are learning faster than I expected. Mia smiled. Sometimes the loudest lesson is the one no one wants to hear. He looked at her for a moment, recognizing the quiet wisdom of someone far younger but already grounded in truth. "You remind me of myself, years ago," he said. "The difference is you learned your courage early. Do not lose it." "I will not," she said. After she left, Carla asked, "Sir, what are you thinking?" Daniel gazed at the letter again. That the hardest part of change is not beginning it, it is continuing after the cameras leave. Carla nodded. "Then what is next?" He turned toward the window. The city was wide awake now, cars moving in steady lines, the pulse of progress visible in every reflection. "Next," he said quietly, "we go global. If prejudice can cross borders, then so can integrity." Carla smiled, already anticipating his plan. "International expansion of the Renewal Initiative?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Airports, shipping lines, logistics companies, anywhere people serve people. We build training not from lectures but from lived experience." He paused, then added, "And Carla, make sure the name stays the same." "What name, sir?" He looked down at the letter again, at the words written by the crew. "The silent lesson. That is what this is now." She nodded, typing quickly into her notes. "Understood." Daniel turned back toward the skyline, the morning sun breaking fully through the clouds, flooding the room with gold. For the first time since that flight, the light did not feel harsh. It felt earned. Somewhere far above, another aircraft cut through the air, a silver streak against the blue. Daniel watched it climb higher and whispered under his breath, "Every flight should rise with decency on board." The city moved on, but this time it moved differently, slower, quieter, aware. Because dignity, once awakened, never forgets how to fly. The following week arrived with an energy unlike any other. The story of Flight 492 had outgrown the airline, outgrown even the country. What had started as an act of humiliation at 35,000 feet had become a global conversation about quiet power, systemic bias, and the cost of dignity ignored. Major networks aired documentaries. Universities invited Daniel Reed to speak. Social media feeds pulsed with clips of his voice. His words replayed as if they were scripture for a new kind of revolution, the kind that did not shout, but corrected. Inside Reed AeroCorp's headquarters, the rhythm of work continued, but there was a new pulse in the air. Employees moved with a certain pride, as though they carried part of something larger than their job descriptions. The company cafeteria had been renamed the Dignity Lounge, its walls decorated with photographs of crews and service workers from every culture the company touched. Daniel stood in the center of the room, watching as a group of new recruits gathered for their first orientation. Mia Alvarez was leading the session. She stood confidently now, her voice steady, her energy contagious. "Welcome to Reed AeroCorp," she said to the group. "You are not just here to serve food, you are here to serve respect. What we put on trays feeds the body, but how we deliver it feeds the soul." Her words carried across the room, echoing faintly through the glass walls. Daniel felt a quiet pride rise in his chest. He remembered her trembling voice the day she had spoken the truth on that flight. Now, she stood as proof that courage could multiply. When the session ended, Mia walked over to him. "Mr. Reed," she said, smiling, "I did not expect to see you here in person." I wanted to hear how you teach," he said. "It reminded me why this company exists." She laughed softly. "You taught me that teaching starts with listening." Daniel nodded. "It seems you were listening all along." They shared a brief, understanding silence before Carla entered, tablet in hand. "Sir, we just received confirmation. The United Nations Human Rights Commission has invited you to present the Silent Lesson Program at their next forum in Geneva." Mia's eyes widened. "That is huge." Daniel looked thoughtful. "It is necessary. The air may change over different continents, but the struggle for respect breathes the same everywhere." Carla smiled faintly. "That will be quite a headline, sir." "I am not chasing headlines," Daniel said. "I am chasing habits." Later that afternoon, the conference room filled again, this time with executives, legal advisors, and corporate partners from multiple countries joining via video link. Maps, charts, and data illuminated the walls, each representing another airline, another company pledging to adopt Reed AeroCorp's reform model. Daniel stood at the head of the table. "We are no longer talking about diversity training," he began. "We are talking about ethical architecture. We are rebuilding the system from the inside, so decency is not an exception but a foundation. The room was silent, hanging on his words. Every organization here will implement the silent lesson program within 3 months, he continued. This is not a suggestion. It is a standard, and it will be measured not by profit but by behavior. A representative from an international carrier raised a hand. Mr. Reed, how will we prove it is working? Daniel met his gaze. When your customers no longer have to record injustice to be believed. The line struck like thunder, quiet, sharp, final. No one spoke after that. They simply nodded. When the meeting ended, Daniel returned to his office. Carla followed with the debrief. That was powerful, sir. You turned a scandal into a movement. Daniel shook his head slightly. I did not turn it. I revealed it. The world was already ready to listen. It just needed silence loud enough to hear itself. Carla's expression softened. Sometimes I wonder if you ever allow yourself to rest. Daniel glanced toward the window where the city glowed beneath the setting Sunday. Rest is not the opposite of work, he said quietly. Rest is the reward for meaning. That evening, he attended a charity gala hosted by Horizon Air. The event had been planned months before the incident, but now its theme had changed. Rebuilding trust. The ballroom gleamed under crystal lights, filled with executives, journalists, and community leaders. For the first time, Horizon Air's crew uniforms had been redesigned, each featuring a small pin in the shape of a silver feather, a symbol of humility and flight earned, not given. Eleanor Finch, the Horizon Chief Executive Officer, greeted Daniel at the entrance. Her demeanor was calm, transformed. Mr. Reed, she said, thank you for coming. I was not sure you would. Daniel looked around the room. I do not attend celebrations. I attend reminders. She nodded. Then let this one remind you that we are still learning. A hush spread as the master of ceremonies took the stage. Tonight, we recognize the partnership that turned a moment of shame into a legacy of change. Mr. Daniel Reed, would you please join us? Daniel walked to the stage amid soft applause. The lights above him felt warm, not blinding. He stood at the microphone, scanning the crowd, a sea of faces that once might have seen him as an outsider. Now they watched in quiet respect. I am not here to be honored, he began. I am here to remind all of us that equality is not a destination, it is maintenance. It is the daily act of looking at another person and seeing value instead of difference. He paused, his voice steady, the room utterly still. The silent lesson was never about one flight or one company. It is about one truth. Dignity should not depend on recognition. It should exist, even when no one is watching. Applause rose not the polite kind, but the kind that carried emotion, that made the air itself tremble. Eleanor Finch stepped forward, holding out a small plaque engraved with his name. Mr. Reed, she said, you reminded us that power can correct itself without cruelty. Daniel accepted the plaque but said softly, correction is not power, it is responsibility. He left the stage without lingering applause, his message already complete. Outside, the night had turned quiet again. The city's hum returned to its steady rhythm. Daniel looked up at the sky where a single plane traced a silver arc across the darkness. He thought of every passenger inside it, strangers sharing space, unaware of each other's stories, yet connected by trust. He whispered to himself, may every flight carry more than people, may it carry lessons. And beneath the stars, the sound of engines blended with the pulse of a world learning, finally, how to rise without stepping on anyone to do it. The following days unfolded like the steady rhythm of a new era. The shock of Flight 492 had long since faded from headlines, but its aftershocks rippled quietly through boardrooms, classrooms, and every corner of the travel industry. The world had moved on, yet something fundamental had shifted. For once, people were not just talking about justice, they were designing it. At Reed AeroCorp headquarters, the sun poured through the glass atrium, turning the marble floor into a pool of soft gold. Employees passed through the lobby with calm purpose. The building no longer felt like a corporate fortress. It felt like a promise fulfilled. In his office overlooking the skyline, Daniel Reed reviewed a stack of reports. The Silent Lesson Initiative had been adopted by over 50 global partners in less than a month. Airlines in Asia, Europe, and Africa had begun rewriting their service charters to include mandatory empathy certification. It was not a campaign anymore, it was infrastructure. Carla Jensen entered quietly, a folder in her hands. Sir, I thought you might want to see this. She placed it on his desk and opened it to reveal a letter printed on elegant stationery. The header read Horizon Air Employee Council. Daniel adjusted his glasses and began to read. The letter was signed by dozens of names. Dear Mr. Reed, we are writing to express our gratitude. The training has changed how we see each other. We realize that respect cannot be taught through manuals. It is felt through example. You gave us that example. For that, we thank you. Daniel read it twice, then set it down slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers lingered on the page. Carla studied him carefully. You have built something permanent, sir, not just a program, but a standard. Daniel looked out the window. Nothing is permanent, he said quietly. But maybe, if we are careful, it can last long enough to matter. Before Carla could respond, the intercom buzzed. The receptionist's voice came through softly. Mr. Reed, there is a visitor requesting to see you. She says her name is Rebecca Hayes. Carla froze. Should I have her escorted out? Daniel's tone was calm. No, let her in. Moments later, Rebecca stepped into the office. Her posture was stiff but humble. She wore no uniform, no badge, only a simple gray suit. She looked older, though only weeks had passed. Life had pressed on her in ways that time could not measure. Mr. Reed, she said quietly, thank you for agreeing to see me. Daniel gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. She did, clutching a small envelope in her hands. I came to return something, she said, sliding it across the desk. My final paycheck from Horizon. I could not keep it, not after what happened. Daniel looked at the envelope but did not touch it. What you do with your remorse is up to you, Miss Hayes. You do not owe me money. You owe yourself growth. Her eyes glistened. I have been attending the empathy sessions. I thought they would feel like punishment. They did not. They felt like truth. It hurts, but it is a different kind of pain, the kind that heals. Daniel regarded her carefully. Pain has two purposes, he said. It can either punish or instruct. The difference depends on whether you listen. She nodded slowly. I listened. She paused, swallowing hard. Mr. Reed, I know an apology will never erase what I did, but I need to say it anyway. I am sorry for the words I said, and for the ones I did not stop myself from thinking. Daniel leaned back, his gaze steady but not harsh. Then carry that awareness forward. You cannot rewrite the past, but you can edit your next chapter. Rebecca exhaled shakily. That is what I plan to do. I have accepted an offer from a community outreach program in Chicago. They teach emotional intelligence to young people in aviation training. I want to start over where I can do better. Oh, a small smile touched Daniel's face. Then do not start over. Continue. Redemption is not beginning again, it is beginning wiser. Rebecca stood slowly. Thank you, Mr. Reed, for your patience, and for not letting anger become your legacy. He gave a quiet nod. Anger is loud. Integrity whispers. The world needed to hear the whisper this time. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. Sir, one more thing. You once said that every system is judged by how it treats the people who cannot fight back. I think I finally understand that now. Daniel looked up. Then the lesson was worth it. When she left, Carla stepped back into the office, her expression thoughtful. You handled that with more grace than most could manage. Daniel smiled faintly. Grace costs less than revenge and pays better in the end. They stood in quiet reflection for a moment. Outside, the sky shifted from afternoon blue to pale orange. The city pulsed with motion, unaware that its heartbeat had changed tempo. Carla broke the silence. Sir, there is one more matter. The United Nations event in Geneva has been scheduled for next month. They are calling it the Ethics of Elevation. They want you to open the forum. Daniel nodded. Prepare the draft for my remarks. But no speeches about myself. Make it about the people who learn to listen. Oh, yes, sir, Carla said, smiling. That has always been your way. Daniel walked toward the window. Far below, planes lined up on the runway, their lights blinking in rhythm. He watched them rise one by one into the sky, silver streaks cutting through the last glow of sunset. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. Every ascent begins with resistance. That is what makes lift possible. Carla looked at him, understanding the double meaning. Then maybe that is what we are all doing now, learning to lift. Daniel turned from the window, a trace of warmth in his eyes. Exactly. One flight, one lesson, one act of decency at a time. As night settled over the city, the office lights dimmed automatically. Daniel's reflection lingered faintly in the glass. A man once mistaken for a passenger now standing as a pilot of change. And though the world outside continued to buzz with noise, the silence in that room spoke louder than anything ever broadcast. It was the sound of dignity, restored. The day of the United Nations Forum arrived beneath a pale Geneva sky, washed clean by early rain. The Palais des Nations stood in quiet majesty, its marble pillars gleaming under soft sunlight. Flags from nearly every country on Earth lined the long promenade, fluttering in the wind like a silent audience, waiting for the world to say something worth listening to. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, hundreds of delegates, journalists, and leaders took their seats. The air carried the hum of whispered anticipation. On the central screen above the stage was a simple title, The Ethics of Elevation, Redefining Power Through Dignity. When Daniel Reed entered, the murmurs quieted almost instantly. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie this time, just the open collar of a man who had nothing left to prove. He walked calmly to the podium, his footsteps measured, deliberate. The cameras began to roll, lights softened, and the world leaned in. He began without greeting, without introduction, just words that cut straight through the silence. "Every system believes it is fair," Daniel said, his voice steady and unhurried. "Every institution believes it is just. But fairness is not a belief, it is a behavior. And justice is not a principle until it is practiced." A stillness settled across the room. Even the shuffling of papers stopped. "I did not come here to talk about an airline," he continued. "I came here to talk about altitude, the altitude of humanity, because we have spent so much time learning how to make machines fly that we forgot how to lift people with us." He let the words breathe. His voice carried not like a politician's, but like a truth-teller, quiet, direct, undeniable. "I once sat on a plane," he said. "I was served a spoiled meal. It was not the food that made it bitter. It was the assumption that my skin, my silence, my seat, all meant less. And when I was insulted, I did not raise my voice. I raised a question: what happens when respect becomes optional?" The room was so still that even the translation headsets seemed to hum more softly. "What happened that day," Daniel said, "was not an incident, it was a mirror. It reflected every unchecked bias, every ignored warning, every comfort built on someone else's discomfort. That is what the silent lesson became. It was not a reaction, it was a reflection." He looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of ambassadors and CEOs, educators and activists. "We talk about equity as if it is an invention. It is not. It is a return to the simple truth that no one's worth should depend on recognition." He paused, then leaned slightly forward. "If you want to know what kind of leader you are, do not measure your followers. Measure the silence that surrounds your mistakes. That silence will tell you who you have made afraid to speak." The words landed with precision, each syllable sinking deeper into the crowd. Daniel took a slow breath. "When I built Reed AeroCorp, I wanted to feed travelers. I did not realize the real hunger was for respect. So now, every meal we serve carries a message. Every training we run carries a mirror. Because dignity is not dessert, it is the main course." The audience erupted, not in applause yet, but in energy. Heads nodded, eyes glistened, pens raced across notebooks. Daniel continued. "Power without empathy is architecture without foundation. It looks impressive, but the first wind of truth will bring it down. The systems we build must not only function, they must feel." He gestured slightly toward the massive screen behind him, where footage began to play. Images of flight attendants in training, ground crews helping passengers, and children from underprivileged schools learning through the Silent Lesson Initiative filled the hall. Faces of every color, every language, every faith appeared. "This," Daniel said softly, "is the altitude I believe in." The final image froze a photograph of a flight attendant kneeling to help an elderly passenger fasten his seatbelt, both smiling, both equal in that moment. Daniel looked up at the crowd once more. The silent lesson was never about revenge. It was about realignment, about teaching a world that forgot how to listen that silence, too, can be an act of power. We do not need to shout to shake the walls of indifference. Sometimes, all we need is the courage to stand still and let the truth echo. He stepped back from the podium. For several seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, the audience began to rise one row, then another, until the entire hall stood in unanimous applause. It was not thunderous. It was reverent. Carla Jensen watched from the wings, her eyes shining. She had seen Daniel command boardrooms, transform companies, and silence arrogance with intellect, but she had never seen him like this. He was not just speaking, he was healing. After the applause subsided, Daniel left the stage quietly, avoiding interviews, avoiding spectacle. Outside the building, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, lighting the rows of flags like stained glass. Carla caught up to him near the steps. "You did it," she said softly. "You turned a story of humiliation into a global doctrine." Daniel smiled faintly. "I did not turn it. I translated it. Humanity speaks every language, it just needed reminding." They walked down the steps together toward the waiting car. Reporters called out, cameras flashed, but Daniel waved them away politely. He did not need to speak anymore. The message had already taken flight. As they drove away, Geneva spread out before them, glittering beside the lake. Carla looked over. "Sir, what will you call this new movement you just created?" Daniel looked out the window at the sky. "No movement," he said. "Movements end, lesson last." The car drove on, disappearing into the winding streets. Above them, planes crossed paths in the clear blue sky, their trails forming white lines that faded but never truly vanished. Daniel watched them, his reflection faint against the glass. He whispered, almost to himself, "May we always rise without leaving anyone behind." Oh, and as the city drifted past, it was clear that the man once served spoiled food had, in his quiet way, served the world something far more lasting, a taste of its own humanity, finally remembered. That night, Geneva glowed like a constellation reflected on Earth. The city was alive, but Daniel Reed's hotel suite was silent. He stood by the window, looking out over Lake Geneva, where the water shimmered under moonlight. His speech had traveled farther than he had imagined. News outlets from Tokyo to New York broadcasted clips of his words. Commentators called it the most human moment the United Nations had seen in a decade. But Daniel was not thinking about headlines. He was thinking about responsibility. On the table behind him lay a stack of handwritten letters delivered earlier that evening. Not emails, not typed notes, actual letters from people across the world. A teacher in Kenya, a pilot in Germany, a single mother in Atlanta. Each one carried a story of someone who had felt invisible until they heard him speak. He opened one envelope slowly. The letter was written in blue ink, the handwriting uneven but sincere. "Mr. Reed, I work in customer service. People talk down to me every day. But after I heard you say that silence can be an act of power, I tried it. I stopped apologizing for existing. I spoke less, but I meant more. Thank you for reminding me that respect starts inside." "Oh." Daniel folded the letter carefully, setting it beside the others. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders eased. He realized that these quiet voices were the true measurement of success, not the applause, not the praise, the change that began in unseen places. The phone on the desk buzzed softly. It was a secure call from Carla. "Sir," she said, her voice warm with restrained excitement, "I thought you should know. After your speech, the United Nations passed an immediate motion to integrate empathy training into all international service industries. Airlines, hospitality, logistics, everyone. The silent lesson is becoming global policy." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then the lesson has found its wings," Carla continued. "They also want to name the initiative after you, the Reed Accord." He shook his head, even though she could not see it. "No names, no monuments. Let the work speak for itself." Carla's voice softened. "I will make sure of it." After the call ended, Daniel turned back to the window. The lake was still, but the reflection of the moon rippled gently on its surface. It reminded him of something his grandmother used to say when he was a boy. Still water holds the sky better than waves ever could. He thought of the flight attendant who had humiliated him, the captain who had apologized, the passengers who had borne witness, and the trainee who had spoken truth. Every one of them had been part of this chain reaction. The story had never been about a single man. It had been about what happens when one person chooses dignity over fury. He walked toward the small writing desk by the bed and opened his notebook. On a blank page, he wrote 3 sentences slowly, deliberately. "Justice is not revenge, it is restoration. and restoration is only real when everyone learns from the wreckage. He underlined the final word, then closed the notebook. Outside, the wind stirred the curtains slightly, carrying the faint sound of distant laughter from the street below. The city was alive again, but different now, gentler, lighter, the kind of peace that follows an honest reckoning. Daniel sat down, his reflection faint in the glass before him. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel what he had long denied. Not triumph, but peace. He whispered to the empty room. We flew through chaos and landed in clarity. Oh. And as he turned off the lights, the city's glow softened, leaving only the faint shimmer of the lake and the steady pulse of a man who had proven that quiet strength could move the world farther than noise ever could. The next morning arrived soft and golden, Geneva waking slowly under a sky that seemed freshly painted. The storm of cameras had faded overnight, leaving behind only the echo of what had been said and the work that still waited. Daniel Reed stood on the terrace of his hotel, coffee in hand, watching the sunlight crawl across the lake. The air smelled of rain and renewal. For the first time in months, he felt still, not paused, but centered. The world had taken his words and carried them farther than he ever could. Now, it was his turn to listen. Carla Jensen joined him on the terrace, a folder tucked under her arm. "Good morning, sir," she said with a soft smile. "You made history last night." "Oh." Daniel looked at the horizon. "History does not interest me. Continuity does." She nodded, expecting that answer. "Then continuity is exactly what you have. Requests for partnerships have tripled since the speech. Schools, corporations, even government agencies are asking to adopt the silent lesson framework. They are calling it a moral infrastructure plan." Daniel turned toward her. "Then we make sure it remains moral, not marketable. The moment it becomes a brand, it dies." Carla smiled faintly. "You always know how to stop success from becoming arrogance." He glanced back at the lake. "Because arrogance is just insecurity in disguise, and I have seen enough of both." Carla opened the folder and handed him a single sheet. "There is one more update. Horizon Air has appointed Mia Alvarez as their new Director of Cultural Training. She sent this message for you." Daniel took the sheet, reading her brief handwritten note. "Mr. Reed, you once said courage grows quietly. I think it just grew into a career. Thank you for trusting me before the world did." He read it twice, the edges of his mouth curving into the smallest of smiles. She was never just a trainee. She was a compass. Carla's voice softened. "You gave her direction." "No," Daniel said, folding the note carefully. "I only pointed to true north. She walked there herself." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city drifted upward, the hum of trams, the distant bells of the old quarter, the low murmur of a world returning to ordinary life. Daniel finally said, "Do you know what I have learned from all of this, Carla? That silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of control. We think justice has to roar, but sometimes it only has to hold its ground." Carla looked at him, her expression a mixture of admiration and quiet awe. "And what will you do now, sir? You have changed the system. What is left to change?" Daniel set his coffee down, watching a plane lift gracefully into the blue. "What is left," he said softly, "is to make sure it stays in the air." The morning light caught his reflection in the glass door, a man who had walked through prejudice, not around it, and turned pain into policy. And as the city stirred beneath him, Daniel Reed smiled, knowing that true leadership was never about being seen. It was about leaving the world incapable of forgetting what it had witnessed. A week later, Daniel Reed returned to Atlanta. The plane touched down quietly under a violet dusk, the kind of sky that made the city glow as if it were remembering its own heart. From the window, he watched the runway lights blur into lines of gold, and for a fleeting moment, he thought about that first flight, the humiliation, the silence, the moment everything had shifted. Now the silence felt different. Not heavy, not wounded, just powerful. At the gate, a small group of Reed AeroCorp employees waited to greet him. No fanfare, no banners, just familiar faces wearing proud smiles. Mia Alvarez stood among them, her posture steady, her confidence undeniable. She stepped forward first, extending her hand. "Welcome home, Mr. Reed," she said. He smiled. "It seems you have been busy while I was away." She laughed softly. "Busy, yes, but I am still trying to catch up with the shadow you cast." Daniel shook his head. "Do not chase shadows, Mia. Make your own light. They walked together through the terminal. Everywhere they passed, people recognized him not with applause or intrusion, but with subtle nods, respectful glances, quiet gratitude. It was the kind of fame Daniel valued most, the kind that spoke without words. Outside, the night air was warm and familiar. The city hummed with the rhythm of life, distant horns, laughter from open-air restaurants, the echo of something unbroken. As they approached the company car, Mia hesitated. "Sir," she said, "I have been thinking about something since Geneva. You said the silent lesson was not a movement but a lesson. But what happens when the lesson ends?" Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "The lesson never ends, Mia. It only changes teachers. One day, it will not be mine to tell anymore. It will be yours." She nodded, visibly moved. "Then I will make sure it stays honest." "I know you will," Daniel said. When the car pulled away from the terminal, Daniel looked out at the city lights flashing by. Atlanta had grown since he last saw it, but it still carried the same pulse, the same hunger for progress, for justice, for possibility. He thought of the thousands of people now training under the silent lesson, of every crew member, executive, and student who had chosen introspection over instinct. Carla, seated in the front, turned slightly. "Sir, while you were flying, I finalized the details for the next phase of the program. We are extending it to public institutions, hospitals, schools, even law enforcement agencies. The pilot version launches in 6 months." Daniel raised an eyebrow. 6 months? "Yes," Carla said. "We are calling it Phase 5, ground level." Daniel smiled faintly at the name. "Good. Justice should not only fly, it should walk." Carla chuckled softly. "You always find the right words, sir." "No," Daniel said quietly, looking out the window again. "The right words find me when I remember why I started." The car turned onto Peachtree Street, the skyline shimmering like glass set on fire. In that glow, Daniel saw reflections of every place he had been: airports, boardrooms, and classrooms, all leading back here. He spoke after a long silence. "You know, Carla, when I was a child, I used to watch planes and wonder what made them stay up there. My grandmother told me it was lift pressure from below strong enough to fight gravity. I think that is what people need, too. Not privilege pulling them up, but respect holding them steady." Carla nodded slowly, her eyes soft. "That is beautiful, sir." "It is simple truth," Daniel said. "You cannot rise if the air beneath you is poisoned." The car slowed as it reached the front of the Reed AeroCorp headquarters. The lights inside glowed warmly, not like a business at the end of a workday, but like a home that never really slept. Daniel stepped out, taking a deep breath of his city's night air. "Welcome back," Carla said quietly. Daniel smiled. "It feels different this time. The world turned once while I was away." He stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching a plane trace a thin silver line high above the skyline. The city lights mirrored its path below, as if the earth and sky were finally in agreement. And as the plane disappeared into the distance, Daniel whispered to himself, "Every ascent deserves a landing that honors it." Then he turned toward the building, his legacy alive, his lesson airborne, and walked through the doors with the calm certainty of a man who no longer needed to fight to be seen. The morning light returned to Atlanta like a quiet promise. It spilled through the glass walls of Reed AeroCorp's headquarters, bathing the marble floors in soft gold. The city outside was already alive, but inside the building, a special kind of calm filled the air, the calm that follows when a vision has finally taken root. Daniel Reed stood in the main atrium, looking up at the company's new installation, a sculpture of intertwined silver wings suspended above the lobby. Beneath it, engraved in the floor, were 5 simple words: "Dignity is the highest altitude." Employees passed by in silence, touching the edge of the inscription as if it were sacred. Carla Jensen joined him, holding 2 coffee cups. "It is beautiful, sir," she said, handing him one. "The artist called this piece Lift. He said it is about how pressure can create flight." Daniel smiled faintly. "Fitting, isn't it? Pressure gave us everything we have." Carla nodded. "You should be proud. What began as a single act of disrespect became an entire blueprint for change. Every airline under the Silent Lesson Initiative has reported measurable progress in cultural integrity. Even the United Nations is using your framework as a model for international ethics reform." Daniel sipped his coffee and looked around at the faces passing through the atrium, young, old, from every color and language. "Progress," he said softly. That is the word I like most. It does not promise perfection. It only promises motion. At that moment, Mia Alvarez appeared from the elevator. Her uniform had been replaced by a sleek director's badge. She walked up, her confidence now natural, her eyes bright with purpose. "Sir," she said, smiling, "Phase 5. Ground level officially launches today. The first group of public educators and law enforcement trainees are beginning their session right now." Daniel's eyes warmed. "And who is leading it?" "I am," she said proudly. "With your permission, of course." "You never needed my permission, Mia," Daniel replied. "You earned your own authority." Carla glanced at him, smiling. "You realize, sir, that the world now has leaders who learn directly from your silence." Daniel chuckled softly. "Good. Then I have done my job." They walked together toward the observation deck overlooking the airport below. From there, the view stretched for miles, runways glistening, planes lifting steadily into the morning sky. Each ascent caught the sunlight, leaving thin white lines like echoes of motion. Daniel spoke quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "You know, people still ask me if I regret not standing up on that flight and shouting back. But if I had, all they would have remembered was noise. Instead, they remember what came after the stillness, the mirror, the change. Sometimes silence is not surrender. It is precision." Mia listened carefully, her expression solemn. "Do you think the world will stay this way, sir? Or will it forget?" Daniel looked up at the sky, where another plane disappeared into a streak of light. "Forgetting is human," he said. "But learning that is evolution. As long as someone chooses reflection over reaction, the lesson will survive." Carla set down her tablet. "Then this is the end of the story," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "No, stories end. Leçon continue." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, watching the planes rise, symbols of progress, resilience, and unspoken grace. The sunlight caught Daniel's face, drawing soft lines of wisdom where others might have seen age. He turned toward them both, his voice calm and certain. "I used to think justice was a destination. Now I know it is a direction, and we just have to keep walking it together." Mia smiled. "Then where to next?" Daniel looked out one last time at the open sky. "Wherever the air still feels heavy," he said. "That is where we belong." The camera of the world, if it could see him then, would have found the perfect closing frame Daniel Reed standing between two generations of leadership, the reflection of the rising sun mirrored in his eyes. No applause, no spotlight, just quiet truth. And as another plane climbed soundlessly above the horizon, the words engraved beneath his feet seemed to glow brighter in the morning light. Dignity is the highest altitude. The lesson had begun as a whisper, but now it was eternal.